How much does a miracle cost? For Clara Vance, a millionaire architect, the price wasn't money. The price was dipping into icy water she didn't believe in, for the sake of a mother she was terrified to leave behind. The water in the Lourdes spring is 12 degrees, icy, burning cold. But when Clara Vance, architect, skeptic, and a woman with a bomb in her head, plunged into it, she didn't feel the cold. She felt a fire erupt inside her skull. Doctors gave her 2 months. Science gave her a 0% chance. But what Clara brought back in an ordinary plastic vial turned out to be more powerful than any chemotherapy. Get ready to hear a story that proves sometimes to survive, you have to burn down everything you used to believe in. Clara Vance, 34, didn't believe in miracles. She believed in blueprints. As a lead architect at Sterling & Vance, she knew that any building stands only because of precise calculations, steel beams, and the laws of gravity. If there is a crack in the foundation, the building falls. Prayers won't help here. Concrete doesn't listen to prayers. And right now, her own building was collapsing. She sat in Dr. Marcus Sterling's office. Sterling wasn't just a doctor. He was the god of Chicago neurosurgery, a man whose hands were insured for a sum exceeding the budget of a small country. If Sterling couldn't cut something out, it meant it was part of your soul. The glowing panel on the wall showed a black and white image of Clara's skull, and that white spot, bright, sharp, the size of a good lemon. Glioblastoma, stage 4. Sterling's voice was cold and smooth as polished marble. He didn't look at Clara. He looked at the scan like an offended artist whose canvas had been ruined. It has entwined the brainstem, Clara, like ivy. We can't cut here without killing you on the table. Clara adjusted her blazer. Perfect cut, not a single crease. She always kept her face. Marcus, let's skip the drama. How much will it cost? I can fly to Switzerland. To Japan. I'll sell the loft. Dr. Sterling finally turned. He took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. It was a gesture of defeat. You can't buy your way out of this, Clara. This isn't a lawsuit or a contractor's mistake. He slid a folder across the desk. 2 months, maybe 3. If you stop working today, seizures will start, then loss of speech, then... He didn't finish. He didn't need to. 2 months, Clara repeated. That was the deadline for her current project, a skyscraper on the waterfront. The irony was so sharp she tasted metal in her mouth. Go home, Clara. Get your affairs in order. Walking out of the clinic felt like going underwater. Chicago was loud, sirens, taxis, wind from Lake Michigan chilling to the bone. People were running about their business, checking phones, drinking coffee. They were alive, and Clara felt like a ghost. She sat in her car, put her hands on the steering wheel, and just watched the wipers swipe away the raindrops, right, left, life-death. She didn't cry. Architects don't cry when they see ruins. They analyze the scale of the disaster, and the disaster was total. At home, in her spotless, minimalist loft, it smelled of lavender and fried onions. This smell didn't fit her glass and chrome interior. Mom. Maria Vance had flown in from Florida a week ago when Clara first collapsed at a meeting. Maria was the complete opposite of her daughter, a small, soft woman with warm hands and a faith that could move mountains, or at least annoy Clara very much. Clara walked in, tossing her keys on the side table. The sound of metal hitting glass was too loud. Maria came out of the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. She didn't need to ask. Mothers always know. She saw her daughter's face, that gray, frozen mask, and her eyes filled with tears. No, Clara said harshly, raising her hand. Don't, Mom, don't pity me. Sterling said 2 months, the end. She walked to the bar and poured herself water. Her hands shook, spilling water on the expensive countertop. Inoperable. That's the word of the day, Mom. Inoperable. Maria remained silent. She approached her daughter, not with hugs, but with a determination Clara rarely saw in her. She reached into the pocket of her knitted cardigan and pulled something out. Not pills, not the phone number of a top lawyer. It was an envelope, and old worn wooden rosary beads, the same rosary Clara's grandmother clutched when she died in hospice. "You will go," Maria said quietly. Clara scoffed, looking at the envelope. "Where? Disneyland?" "Mom, I'm 34 and I have a bomb in my head." "To Lourdes." Clara froze. Lourdes, France, the place where millions of Catholics flock in hope of a miracle. A place Clara always called a tourist trap for the desperate. "You're joking," Clara whispered. Anger was boiling in her voice. "I'm dying, and you're suggesting I dip into a dirty bath. It's not dirt, Clara. It's water from the spring of St. Bernadette." Maria placed the envelope on the table. Inside were tickets. Departure was the day after tomorrow. "I don't believe in your fairy tales, Mom," Clara screamed. It was the first time all day she had raised her voice. "I am a person of science. I believe in MRIs, scalpels, and chemotherapy. God is not in this room, Mom. It's just me and my tumor." Maria didn't back down. She took Clara's hand, the cold, rigid hand of an architect, and pressed the tickets into it. "Science gave up on you, daughter. Sterling gave up on you. You have no more blueprints." She looked Clara straight in the eye. "Do this for me. If you want to die angry and right, go ahead, but give me one chance to save you, even if you don't believe in it." Clara looked at the tickets. Chicago O'Hare to Paris, Charles de Gaulle to Lourdes. Then she looked at her mother, at those wrinkles by her eyes, at the trembling lips that whispered prayers for her every night for 34 years. Clara had no hope, but she also had no strength to fight the only person who still loved her broken foundation. "Fine," Clara exhaled. It sounded like defeat. "I'll go. I'll dip into that damn water. And when nothing happens, because nothing will happen, Mom, we will come back, and you will let me die in peace without these tricks." Maria smiled, sadly, but with a tiny spark of victory. "Okay, sweetheart, that's all I ask." Clara didn't know then, standing in her designer kitchen, that this ticket wasn't just a trip to France, it was a one-way ticket, because the Clara Vance who would board the plane in 48 hours would never return to Chicago the same. And inside her head, the lemon pulsed with a dull, rhythmic pain, counting down the time. Tick, tick, tick. Lourdes, France, does not smell like croissants and lavender. It smells of wet stone, cheap paraffin from thousands of candles, and, worst of all for Clara, desperate, sticky hope. They had been standing in line for the baths for 2 hours. The sky was gray, heavy as an old wool blanket. The rain here didn't fall, it hung in the air like a fine mist. Clara adjusted the hood of her raincoat. She was cold, but not from the weather. The cold came from within. The lemon in her head was particularly angry today. It pressed on the back of her neck, sending sharp electrical impulses down her spine. Around them was a river of wheelchairs, people on stretchers, children with empty eyes, old people holding hands. It was a conveyor belt of suffering. "Mom, I can't," Clara whispered. Her vision began to blur at the edges, the first sign. Sterling had warned, when peripheral vision starts to fade, it means the tumor is compressing the optic nerves it had started, right here, in line for a miracle. Maria squeezed her daughter's elbow. Her fingers were firm. "We're almost there, Clara. Look." They stood before the entrance to the baths. A humble stone building, blue curtains, no magic, just a place where people get undressed and get wet. "This is unsanitary," Clara muttered, feeling nausea rise in her throat. Thousands of sick people in the same water. "I'll catch cholera here before I die of cancer." "Shut up, Clara," Maria said softly. "Just walk." Inside the changing room, it was quiet. The volunteers, women in blue aprons, moved with the efficiency of nurses, but with the smiles of angels. They didn't speak English, but the language of pain is universal. One of them, an elderly French woman with kind wrinkles, gestured for Clara to undress. Clara felt humiliated. She, Clara Vance, who wore Armani suits and managed budgets of millions of dollars, now stood shivering, naked, covered only by a wet sheet, in a room with strangers. "Madame, s'il vous plaît," the volunteer pointed to the stone tub. The water was dark and freezing. The spring flows from the mountains. The water temperature is about 12 degrees Celsius, enough to stop your breath. Clara was dizzy. The tumor pulsed to the rhythm of her heart. Boom! 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 She wanted to turn around and run, but she saw her mom standing by the entrance. Maria was praying, eyes closed, fingering her wooden rosary. Her lips moved in a soundless rhythm. Fine. One time. Just to make her shut up. Clara took a step. The icy water burned her ankles. A second step. The water reached her knees. Her body instinctively clenched. Volunteers supported her by the arms on both sides. "Dip, madame," quickly. Clara closed her eyes, held her breath, and let them lower her into the water. She expected shock. She expected piercing cold that would make her teeth chatter. She expected the smell of dampness. But what happened in the next second defied all logic. The moment the water touched her neck and the back of her head, the world exploded. It wasn't cold. It was heat. Not warm water, not the pleasant warmth of a fireplace. It felt as if someone had poured molten gold into her skull. The heat wasn't outside. It was inside. It started exactly where the lemon sat, in the center of the head. Wild, impossible temperature, as if someone struck a match in a room filled with gas. Clara wanted to scream, but the water covered her head. The sound vanished. Only a hum remained in her ears. And this fire. It didn't burn the skin. It burned something else. It felt like her brain was melting, draining out through her ears, that she was going to die right here in this stone tub in France. This is agony. This is the end. The vessel burst. The thought was clear, panicked. She tried to break free, but the volunteer's hands held tight. 1 second, 2, 3, an eternity in fire. Then she was lifted sharply. Air rushed into her lungs with a wheeze. Water streamed down her face, her hair, her back. Clara hung on the French women's arms. Her legs wouldn't hold her. She expected blood to pour from her mouth, for the darkness to cover her finally. "Ça va, madame?" The volunteer's voice sounded concerned. Clara opened her eyes. She gasped for air, her chest heaving. Her body was shaking, now from the actual cold of the water. But in her head, she froze. She listened to herself like an architect listening for a foundation settling. Silence, ringing, absolute silence. No pulsation, no pressure on the eyes, no electric shocks in the spine. The lemon was silent. For the first time in a year there was no pain in her head. Only a strange, fading echo of that internal heat remained, like coals slowly cooling after a fire. The volunteer wrapped a dry mantle around her. "It's okay, madame. It's okay." Clara looked at her hands. They were pink from the cold water. She looked at the volunteer. Her vision was sharp, perfectly sharp. She saw every thread on the woman's blue apron. "Mom," Clara whispered. Maria was already there. She hugged her wet, shivering daughter. "I know, sweetheart. I know. It's cold." Clara shook her head, pressing her wet cheek against her mother's shoulder. She couldn't say it aloud. It was too crazy, too anti-scientific. But she knew. In that water, she didn't just get wet. Something in her head burned to the ground. The plane had been flying over the Atlantic for 8 hours. It was dark in the business class cabin. Only the dim light of the reading lamp illuminated Clara's hands. She looked at the orange plastic bottle sitting on the tray table. Oxycodone. The label clearly read, "Take every 4 hours for severe pain." Clara looked at her watch. It had been 12 hours since they took off from Charles de Gaulle. She hadn't taken a single pill. It's a trap, her engineer brain thought. She knew how this worked. The calm before the storm. Sterling explained it at the first appointment. Sometimes, before the tumor delivers the final blow, it compresses certain nerve endings, creating an illusion of relief. It's called terminal lucidity. Clara closed her eyes. She waited. She listened. Usually the lemon made itself known with a dull, scraping pulsation behind the left eye, as if someone were slowly turning a rusty screw there. But there was only silence, the same frightening, ringing silence as in that icy bath. Maria was sleeping in the next seat, clutching her rosary in her hand. Even in sleep she looked peaceful. Clara envied her. Her mother's faith didn't need proof. Clara needed blueprints, charts, and scans, and she was afraid of the moment she would see them again. Chicago greeted them with wind that snatched hats and turned umbrellas inside out. Reality returned instantly. Calls from work, bills, letters from lawyers regarding the will. France seemed like a hallucination. That heat in the water? Probably a shock reaction of the body. Hypothermia. Adrenaline. Clara stifled the voice of hope. Hope was dangerous. Hope made the fall hurt more. 2 days later, she sat in Dr. Sterling's waiting room. It was a scheduled visit, the last one before she was transferred to palliative care. Sterling walked in, scrolling through her file on a tablet. He didn't even look up immediately. "Well, how was the trip? I hope you managed to try the croissants?" "I took a dip," Clara said. Sterling raised his eyebrows. He finally looked at her and froze. Usually, stage 4 patients look gray, exhausted, their eyes dim because the body is conserving energy. Clara looked alive. There was color in her cheeks. Her eyes were clear without that characteristic squint of pain. "You look rested," he said cautiously. "Nothing hurts, Marcus. For 3 days now." Sterling nodded, returning to his professional cynicism. "It's the effect of the steroids, Clara. They reduce swelling around the tumor. It's temporary. Don't deceive yourself. I haven't taken steroids for a week, and no painkillers either." The doctor's hand froze over the tablet. For a second, confusion flickered in his eyes, but he immediately suppressed it with logic. The body is a strange thing. Sometimes endorphins work wonders. But you can't cheat physics. The tumor is there, and it's growing. He stood up. "Let's go. We'll do a control scan. I need to know the exact dimensions to adjust the morphine dose for the next stage." He didn't say for the dying stage, but it hung in the air. The MRI room always reminded Clara of a spaceship crypt, cold, sterile, and that huge white tube in the middle. Gary, the senior tech, was there. He knew Clara. He saw her brain more often than her own parents. "Hi, Miss Vance." Gary smiled, but there was pity in his eyes. He knew the prognosis. "Ready for the disco?" "Turn it up loud, Gary," she replied, lying down on the narrow couch. They secured her head in the special coil. Click, click. Now she couldn't move. The couch slid smoothly into the tube. The ceiling was 5 centimeters from her nose. Usually, at this moment, panic overwhelmed Clara, but now, lying in this plastic coffin, she suddenly remembered the sensation of the water in Lourdes. That heat. God, if you exist, she thought for the first time in 20 years. "Just don't let me lose my mind when I see this scan." Gary's voice came through the headphones. "Okay, Clara, we're starting. Don't breathe. Here we go." The machine came to life. The magnets began to spin, scanning every millimeter of her skull, slicing her into digital layers. Clara closed her eyes and waited for the verdict. She didn't know that, in the next room, behind the thick glass, Gary had just spilled coffee on his pants. Because the first image appeared on the monitor. Gary had been an MRI technician for 15 years. He had seen the brains of geniuses, killers, children, and old people. He could distinguish an aneurysm from a glioma before the computer finished processing the pixels. Gary knew Clara Vance's brain by heart. He called her tumor the Death Star, a huge, shapeless white spot eating away at the left hemisphere, shifting the midline. It was impossible to miss. It was like missing an elephant in an elevator. Gary took a sip of cold coffee and looked at the monitor, expecting the familiar picture of destruction. The first slice appeared on the screen. Gary blinked. He adjusted his glasses. Then he leaned closer, almost touching the monitor glass with his nose. The screen was empty. That is, the brain was there. Geary, gray matter, ventricles, everything perfect. But the elephant was missing. "What the hell?" Gary muttered. He typed rapidly on the keyboard. "Protocol error? Wrong coil? Mixed up patient files?" "No. Name on screen. Vance, Clara. Dobb, Y-14-1989. Today's date." Gary pressed the intercom button. "Clara, sorry. We have a slight motion artifact here." "Did you move?" Clara's voice from the speaker sounded tense. "I didn't move, Gary. I didn't even breathe." "What is it? Is it bad?" No, just... The machine is being fussy. Let's try again. Lie like a statue." Gary sweated. He restarted the scan. The machine hummed again. Tick, 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 b-d-d-d-d. Second pass. Same result. Perfect anatomy. Symmetry that Gray's Anatomy would envy. No shift. No swelling. Gary felt a chill run down his spine. This doesn't happen. Lemon-sized tumors don't disappear over the weekend. They don't dissolve. They don't go on vacation. So the machine is broken. It was a $3 million Siemens scanner. But apparently, even it has bad days. "Clara," Gary's voice trembled. "Listen, I need to reboot the system. Full reset. It'll take about 15 minutes. Can you hang in there?" Inside the tube, Clara clenched her fists so hard her nails dug into her palms. Reboot? In medical speak, a technical problem usually meant we saw something so terrible we need to call the doctor before we tell you. "Gary, tell me the truth. Did the tumor grow? Did it burst?" "No, Clara, honestly, I'm not getting a picture at all." Gary lied. He was getting a picture. It was just impossible. While the system rebooted, Gary decided on a drastic measure: contrast. Gadolinium. It's the truth serum for oncology. Tumors are greedy. They drink blood. If you inject contrast dye, any cancer cell, even the most microscopic one, will light up bright white on the screen. You can't hide from contrast. He walked into the procedure room. "Let's inject a little dye, Clara." For clarity, he inserted the needle into the vein. Clara's hands were warm. Veins good. She looked up at him with frightened eyes. "Gary, your face is white." "Skipped lunch," he grunted, and fled back behind the glass. The system booted up. Contrast flowed through the veins. T1 scan with fat suppression, the most honest mode. Gary watched the screen, not breathing. The contrast filled the vessels. The circle of Willis glowed perfectly, but in the left frontal lobe, where the Death Star should have been shining. There was darkness. Healthy, calm tissue. Not a single white speck. Not a single pathological accumulation. Gary slumped back in his chair. His hands were shaking. He reached for the phone but missed the receiver. This was the end of his career. He broke the scanner. Or he went crazy. Or Russian hackers swapped the files. He dialed the internal extension. "Dr. Sterling." "It's Gary, radiology." "I'm busy, Gary. I have a biopsy." "Sir, you need to come down, now." "I told you, send the images to the server." "I can't send what isn't there, sir. You have to see this with your own eyes." I think the machine broke. Or me. 3 minutes later, the control room door flew open. Marcus Sterling entered the way generals do, fast and angry, his coat billowing. "Gary, if you pulled me out of surgery for a calibration..." Gary said nothing. He simply turned the monitor toward the doctor. On the screen, a 3D model of Clara Vance's brain rotated. "What is this?" Sterling asked, squinting. "This is Clara, sir, right now, with contrast." Sterling fell silent. He walked to the desk, leaned on it with both hands. He watched. "You mixed up patients." "No, sir. I checked the wristband. I injected the contrast myself." "You loaded an old scan? A scan from before she got sick?" "She doesn't have scans from before she got sick, sir. The first time she came to us, she was already stage 4. Sterling straightened up. His face became hard, almost stone. "Put last week's scan on the left screen and this one on the right." Gary clicked the mouse. On the left, chaos. A white sphere crushing the brain, death. On the right, order, purity, life. Between these two images, 7 days had passed, and 1 trip to France. Silence hung in the control room, broken only by the hum of the processor cooler. Sterling looked at the screens, and Gary saw an entire world crumbling in the genius surgeon's eyes. A world built on axioms, protocols, and inevitability. "Get her out," Sterling said hoarsely. "Sir, get her out of the machine, immediately." Marcus Sterling entered the MRI room not like a doctor coming to give a patient good news. He entered like a detective at a crime scene where the corpse had suddenly gotten up and walked away. "Get up, Clara." His voice was harsh. He didn't help her down from the couch. He stood aside, arms crossed over his chest, as if afraid of catching... What? Health? Clara sat up, rubbing her temples. Her head was light. Not empty, but light. Like a hot air balloon that had its ballast cut. "What happened, Marcus?" she asked. "Did the machine break?" "No, the machine is working perfectly. Gary is working perfectly. But you..." He fell silent, pursing his lips. "Come with me." He led her into the control room. Gary sat in the corner, twirling a pencil in his hand so fast it turned into a blur. He tried not to look Clara in the eye. Sterling pointed to the monitors. "Look." Clara stepped closer. She was an architect. She knew how to read plans. She knew what structure looked like, what voids looked like, what load-bearing walls looked like. On the left was last week's scan, chaos, a white blotch destroying the symmetry of her mind. On the right was the scan taken 5 minutes ago. Clara pressed her palm against the screen. "Where is it?" she whispered. "That's what I want to ask you, Clara." Sterling's voice cracked into falsetto. He started pacing the cramped room, back and forth. 3 steps there, 3 back. "Glioblastomas don't disappear," he began listing, bending his fingers. "They don't dissolve. They don't go into spontaneous remission. Even if we radiated you with a maximum dose, there would be a scar, there would be a cavity, a hole in the brain filled with liquor, dead tissue." He poked a finger at the right monitor. "And this? Look here. This is not scar tissue. These are healthy neurons. They recovered. The brain rebuilt itself in 7 days. This is biologically impossible. It's as if an amputated leg grew back over the weekend." Sterling was breathing heavily, his face flushed. His world, built on articles in the Lancet and years of practice, was collapsing. He looked at Clara not with joy, but with horror. Because if this scan is real, then everything he knew about medicine was a lie. "Did you take something?" he asked sharply. "Some experimental drug? Mexican herbs?" "What?" Clara tore her gaze from the screen and looked at the doctor. In his eyes, she saw the same thing she had seen in the mirror for the last 6 months. Fear of what he cannot control. Suddenly, Clara found it funny. Laughter bubbled in her throat and burst out, pure, ringing, liberating. Gary in the corner dropped his pencil. Sterling froze. "You find this funny?" "Marcus," Clara said, wiping a tear. "You sound like me? A week ago?" She reached for her handbag, which she had left on the chair. Her movements were fluid. Her coordination was perfect. "I didn't take anything, Marcus. I just went for a dip." "In water?" Sterling scoffed. "In water with E. coli and the hopes of fanatics?" Clara pulled a small object from her bag. It was a cheap plastic vial in the shape of the Virgin Mary, with a blue crown cap. They sell these in Lourdes souvenir shops for €1. Clear liquid sloshed inside. Clara placed the vial on the desk, right next to the control keyboard of the $3 million scanner. The contrast was striking. High-tech versus cheap plastic. Science versus faith. "When I stepped into that water," Clara said quietly, "I felt my head burning. I thought I was dying. But it seems it was a cauterization." She pushed the vial toward the doctor. "Take it, Marcus." Sterling looked at the vial with disgust. "I'm a doctor, Clara. I don't treat patients with holy water." Clara smiled. It was the smile of a person whose foundation had just withstood an earthquake. "It's not for treatment, Marcus. You've already seen the scans. I am healthy." She nodded at the vial. "It is for your doubt, because right now you are sick with it much more than I ever was sick with cancer." Clara Vance turned and walked toward the exit. The click of her heels on the linoleum sounded confident. At the door, she stopped and looked at them one last time, at the stunned technician and the broken genius. "And, Marcus," she said, "cancel the surgery. I have a lot of work. I need to build a skyscraper." The door closed. Silence hung in the control room. Marcus Sterling stood motionless. Then, very slowly, his hand reached for the desk. His fingers, insured for millions, trembled as they touched the cheap plastic side of the vial. On the monitor before him glowed a brain that was as clean as the first day of creation, and science could do nothing about it. 6 months have passed. In the construction world, that's enough time to lay the foundation for a new skyscraper. But Clara Vance was no longer building towers of glass and steel that scratched the sky. She stood on a construction site in a Chicago suburb. She wore a hard hat and held a roll of blueprints. But this building was different, low, surrounded by gardens, with large windows letting in maximum light. It was a new hospice, St. Bernadette's home. Clara inhaled the smell of fresh sawdust and damp earth. She looked at the sun, and she didn't have to squint from pain, no pressure, no darkness, only light. She didn't become a nun. She didn't quit her profession. She just realized that architecture isn't just about the strength of concrete. It's about creating a space where the soul can breathe, even when the body gives up. 20 miles away, in his office on the 40th floor of the medical center, sat Dr. Marcus Sterling. It was late at night. The clinic was asleep. On the desk before him lay a mountain of medical journals, articles on spontaneous remissions and neurogenesis. He was looking for answers. For 6 months he looked for a scientific explanation for what happened to Clara Vance. He went through thousands of theories, genetic mutation, diagnostic error, immune response, but none of them fit. Marcus sighed and took off his glasses. He pushed the expensive journals aside. There, in the center of his mahogany desk, stood an object that didn't belong there, a cheap plastic vial in the shape of the Virgin Mary. The blue cap was still tightly screwed on. He never opened it. He didn't run a chemical analysis of the water. Marcus reached out and touched the plastic. It was cold. Before, looking at such things, he saw only superstition. Now he saw possibility. On the wall opposite hung the scan of Clara's brain, a clean, perfect scan. Marcus Sterling, a man who believed only in what could be cut with a scalpel, finally understood one simple truth. Science can explain how we live. It can explain how cells divide and how neurons work. But sometimes, in rare moments when logic hits a dead end, we need something else to explain why we are given a second chance. He didn't become a believer overnight. He didn't start going to Mass. But he stopped saying the word impossible. And for a man of science, that was the biggest miracle of all. Clara Vance went to die but found life in icy water. Dr. Sterling sought proof but found humility. And the vial of Lourdes water still stands on a desk in one of Chicago's best clinics, as a quiet beacon for those who think there is no more hope. Sometimes, to see a miracle, you just need to close your eyes to the facts and open your heart to the incredible. Do you believe that for God there is no diagnosis of inoperable? If this story touched your heart, do something for me. Write the phrase Lourdes water in the comments. I want to see how many of us there are, those who believe that healing is possible even when the world says no. Let this chain of comments become a prayer for everyone currently fighting illness. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new stories about miracles that change lives. God bless you. Amen.